Hello, my name is Faith Sears, and I am a 7th grade English teacher at Albuquerque School of Excellence. I am presenting my research proposal on student engagement through literature circles. Interestingly, I had the really cool opportunity to actually conduct part of this research, so I was able to use what we were working on in class to sort of guide something that I was doing in my actual classroom practice. And that was a really cool opportunity to do some action research. But I will present the proposal. So a lot of schools target literacy as an area for improvement. Nationally, we have low proficiency levels in reading. At my current school, about 40% of students are grade level proficient when they enter a grade in reading. So we evaluate that not just through PARCC, but also through a test called STAR. I'm not sure what it stands for, but it's through an accelerated reader program, and we do STAR testing every quarter to evaluate what exact month and year they are at in terms of their proficiency in reading. And so my school noticed that we had low literacy rates, so we developed a literacy program during homeroom. This is sort of an independent reading program similar to SSR, or silent sustained reading, that I've often seen implemented as a strategy in English classrooms. So this is a very common sort of program. And specifically at my school, though, we run this program through our homeroom time period, and the English teacher does not teach this class. I choose what books I want students to read based on what I think their grade level is at and their student interest, but their actual instructors for this literacy program is their science teacher, their social studies teacher, their math teacher, and their computer programming teacher, depending on which homeroom the kids are in. Each homeroom has between 18 to 22 students. And throughout this year, I've noticed a lot of frustrations from my colleagues with this program. They don't understand or they don't feel supported by the school and by the program to have the tools necessary to really evaluate whether or not kids are reading, to really evaluate whether or not the kids are learning, whether or not their literacy scores are going up, and they don't feel like this program is really helping. So I went to my English department head and said, I've got to do some research right now for one of my classes about a real-life problem in the workplace. And this is my real-life problem. My colleagues are frustrated. My students aren't learning through this literacy program. It's sort of a waste of time right now, and it's done every day. And so how can I improve this literacy program? So I decided there were a few things that I really wanted to target in order to improve the literacy of the 7th grade students. I decided I wanted to target their engagement in reading, enjoyment in reading, comprehension skills, and confidence in reading. All of these, I think, are important skills for literacy because, one, they need to be engaged in order to be doing the work, so it's important that they're not just using homeroom time as free time. 2, I think they need some enjoyment because part of the reason why this literacy program was even implemented is to create students who want to read, not just have to read. So as much as I love teaching Shakespeare and we can read Shakespeare in my classroom and enjoy it and have fun, that might not be the best book for unsupported 7th grade reading that's going to teach them enjoyment. Comprehension skills, obviously I want their STAR scores to improve as well as their general literacy. And then confidence in reading, because I think that also matters quite a bit on where students feel in terms of engagement. If a student doesn't feel like they're good at something and they've been told they're not good at something, I've noticed that they don't try in the same way. So I wanted to build that confidence that all students, English language learners, special ed, anything like that, they need to, or they can, read. And they can read on grade level, and they can participate with their peers, and they can do what they need to do. So that was sort of the goal of my program. So through some research, I decided the best way the way that I wanted to see if I could improve our independent reading program was through literature circles. I picked this for two reasons. One, it's student-led, so I think student talk is a really important way to build enjoyment and engagement and confidence. And secondly, it seemed like it would be able to ease some of the burdens of my non-ELA teachers. They would be able to evaluate discussions, they would be able to see if students are participating in that, and there'd be a little bit more structure to what exactly they needed to do, and less of this, you're not a reading teacher, but we're going to make you teach reading kind of period. So a literature circle is relatively straightforward. It's a group of about 5 students that lead a discussion themselves based on a common text. Each person in this group has a separate role, and these roles tend to deal with comprehension strategies. The most common ones are discussion director, connector, so making connections, lead questioner, so coming up with questions about the text to discuss, literary luminary, and vocabulary builder. There's variations of the way that has gone, but typically a literature circle, you spend a good deal of class time during the week preparing, so doing your independent reading and getting your role done and completing that work. Then you spend time in the literature circle discussing it, and then finally sharing what you've learned and what you've read. So that is, in a nutshell, the introduction to my project. So in my literature review, I found quite a bit of research about literature circles. It's not a new concept, it's very common and has been proven to be pretty effective if done right. If done wrong, it could have the exact opposite of what I was trying to do and increase wasted time and increase the amount of fake reading. So the literature review is very helpful to see how other people have combated that and be able to be proactive in my approach of implementing this literature circle. I chose 4 articles. 2 of my articles were based in middle school English class, or 3 of them were based in middle school English classrooms alone. And one of them was with 4th through 6th grade English language learners and at-risk students. I also looked a little bit at higher education students and their experience with literature circles. So one of the common themes that I found was that it, again, can have the problem of wasted time and fake reading. But the best way to combat that is through higher level thinking roles. So one of the roles that is recommended to be eliminated is actually vocabulary, because the students don't actually need to read the book in order to find 10 vocabulary words and come up with a definition. And if a student doesn't take their role seriously, that impacts the entire group in the literature circle. And so I knew that from the start, thanks to my literature review. I also saw the way that it would increase comprehension, engagement, and particularly the social impacts that it had for English language learning students and at-risk students. Again, it really is shown to build their confidence. The gaps that I found, though, is there's not a lot of research on how to implement a literature circle with a non-English certified teacher. I also found that there isn't really a measure of the effectiveness of a literature circle to a different reading strategy. So literature circles are the method I chose, but other than the traditional just independently read, take a quiz, there's not a lot of comparison of how effective it is to other strategies to build literacy engagement. And Also, the majority of research takes place in either elementary schools or higher education. It was very hard to find information about literature circles on middle school and high school. It doesn't seem to be as commonly used in those age groups, which I think, at least from my experience, is a great shame, because the students at that age really have a lot to say, and it's a great opportunity for building that engagement and enjoyment in reading by allowing them to talk. Sort of, I think book talk is kind of a similar method too, but in my research I specifically looked for literature circles for fidelity of the specific type of method and strategy that I was using. And in that research, so with that in mind, I specifically tried to address the gap of literature circles' effect on non-English certified teachers, and how science, math, social studies, etc. teachers will approach literature circles. Again, this is just my research proposal, so that is what my research would be looking into. As the semester is not over, I have not found conclusive results yet over whether or not the literature circles are an effective means for our school, at least in the way it was implemented in this literacy program, but I've been getting some pretty positive feedback. So I have a feeling that research will lend itself to show that it is effective even in a classroom led by a non-English language certified or non-English certified teacher. So that brings us to specifically my proposal and the research that I would be doing, or the methodology. So it's, like I said, action research, because I would be doing it in my classroom with my kids, and a mixed methods. I used qualitative data as my primary data source, and that is through interviews and surveys from students and teachers. So students would get a survey about their engagement at the end of literature circles, and then teachers would be interviewed are going to be interviewed about their opinions on how the literature circles went at the end of the program. Some of the questions will be like, has it made classroom management easier? Do you see increased engagement in your classroom? Did this ease some of your workload? Things like that. Then the quantitative and data that I would be getting is from the STAR reading test. So they'd be tested on STAR before we start literature circles and after we start literature circles. Was there an improvement? Did these programs not just create superficial effectiveness where the teachers and the students enjoyed it and feel like you're learning, but did they actually have tangible results of increased literacy? How is it effective? And that would be my secondary data. So the course of this research, I proposed that it would be done over the course of a quarter. Students would get to choose from 2 books, so there'd be a little bit more room for enjoyment, and then be divided into groups of 5 to 6 with 5 to 6 roles, depending on their group size, each week. They'd be tested at STAR at the very beginning of the quarter and at STAR at the very end. And at the end of that quarter would also be when the interviews and the surveys were sent out. The population of this study is going to be 4 7th grade homerooms at a school that has about 600 kids from 1st through 12th grade. So 65% of the students receive free or reduced lunch. The teachers involved in this study have between 2 to 20 years of teaching, some of them multiple subjects, and the students, like I said, have an average of 40% literacy level or proficiency rate. The limitations are partially myself as the researcher, because these are my students, this is my program. There's a little bit of bias, I'm sure. I know these students very well, I know these colleagues very well, and so the STAR, I'm hoping my quantitative data will help eliminate some of that bias of whether or not I find this program to be working. I also am not comparing this to other methods. Like I said, the current reading program that the students had was reading a book independently, taking a test every week, and moving on. So that's the only comparison mode that I have right now, because I didn't have time to create like multiple groups with different strategies to see which one's more effective. So I think that's a great opportunity for further research down the line. So That's sort of this particular project in a nutshell. But I also reflected through this project on how doing research impacts me as a educator and in my work life. And there's 5 main impacts that I determined based off of that information. So the first thing I noticed that research allows me to do is improve my practice. So I can take what I'm researching directly into my classroom. I can take what I've found, what I've done, and change and make my classroom better for whatever it is that my problem is. So if I identify a problem that actually is important to me in my classroom and I conduct research and I try to solve it, then I'm improving my practice directly. I also found a little bit, or with that goes improved problem solving skills. I think one of the things that it can be really hard to do with teaching sometimes is you get burnt out. Sometimes you're like, well, I've tried it, I've tried this, what do I do now? The kids aren't learning, I'm not a good teacher, whatever it is that is your excuse. I find sometimes it's easy to get caught up in that negative realm. So this research allows me to be less, oh, there's a problem minded, and be like, how am I going to find the solution? And leading to that, a growth mindset as well. I'm continuing to develop myself. I'm continuing to produce better and better products and get better and better at my craft through research. Then I found 2 other benefits to research on my work life that are a little bit more practical. For one, that's going to impact my teacher evaluation score, because quite a bit of domains 1 and 4 have to do with if I'm keeping up to date on professional development and research. And it also improves my relationships with my colleagues. I have greater standing in the school. I'm a little bit more respected as I'm conducting these things. And I can say, I have an opinion on how we're running things. Here's the data I've collected. Here's why you should listen to me. And even though I'm a new teacher and young and new to the school, the impact of research and continued professional development in that way gives me support to what I'm saying and credibility, ethos, if you will. So that is student engagement through literature circles in a nutshell. Thank you so much.